Sometimes when people ask me a question related to grammar, conventions, and editing, I have to answer differently if it's an elementary teacher versus someone who teaches middle school or high school. A common question is this: Bill, do I teach the grammar skills holistically in terms of CUPSS 1S, or if you do it correctly, CUPSS 2S's, capitalization, C, usage, U, punctuation, P, spelling, S, and sentence boundaries, S. Those are all the questions that can be asked, but one skill at a time. Your answer choices might have more than one of these, but the skill that's being tested is one at a time. So the question I get is this: if I can't teach the grammar skills in isolation because some dumb person said that we shouldn't, then how should I teach them? Well, sometimes you're going to have to multitask. For example, while you're doing reading skills, understanding content, you're going to have to look at key spelling words slash vocabulary that you can talk about briefly in terms of different rules. And then because some of your kids are not GT, gifted testers, you're going to have to do a lot of GT gifted talking to help them understand how to make connections with word choices that are spelling slash vocabulary related. And so if your kids are not going to be able to understand a certain spelling rule based on just seeing one, then sometimes you need to do what I call ET or ET. ET is not extraterrestrial, it's extra time on that specific skill or extra times. So here is my recommendation. I'm going to show you a video. If you're elementary, how do you teach the skills in isolation in an order that makes sense? Because if nobody ever teaches grammar skills in isolation, then it's going to be like trying to build a house with no foundation, with no floor. So I have a hand with CUPSS, cups, talking about both passages and essays, how they connect together. And I'm going to give my recommendation on what order that you should teach these in. In the palm of my hand, before I even get to the floor, let's talk about the palm being the basement. What do I mean by that? There are things that you have to learn before the grammatical rules, whether you're writing on paper or typing on a computer, that are the basement skills that have to happen. So the best way I can teach this or model it for you is using my text box version of my reading and writing graphic organizer. So if you don't already have this organizer, either just the regular PDF copy where you print it out and write the concepts in by hand, or my text version, uh, you can just draw a hand or trace one. You can also buy the little hands. I had some here, but I have them on my other table right now. Dollar Tree will sell you little hands uh, where you can kind of plug in these little things, and the kids can practice the skill because on the test they can't use a graphic organizer that has a hand, but they can trace their own hand to remember these certain skills. So let me share with you my recommendation on the order that would make the most sense. So you can see here it says on my graphic organizer, editing passages and essays. So the first thing is going to be passages. When we're talking about editing passages, it's going to be this C of conventions. Development and organization, B and O, are revising skills, but conventions are editing skills. And your kids are going to get some passages using these 5 fingers of skills, but they also have to understand the palm there. So, what happens if you spell dock without the C? Well, let's check it out. You get do, and papers without good conventions are doo-doo. It's sort of like eating poop, and I don't mean to be gross, but it's just the truth. If we never practice grammar skills with kids who are not good at it, the the that's going to hurt their essay. Because remember, on the essay, every student is gonna have a chance to earn up to 6 points on the essay in terms of how it's organized and developed. How are they taking evidence and explaining it and possibly exploding it? But the other 4 points are conventions. You can get 2 points from each reader. And so in elementary, middle school, and high school, conventions are going to be worth 4 points, regardless of grade level. But when we come back over here to the passages in elementary, your kids are going to get about 8 points. I'll put E for elementary. 8 points in elementary. In middle school, they're going to have about 9 points, 9 1-point questions on editing. And in high school, they're going to have about 11. And so 8 plus 4, 12 for elementary, 12 points are specifically grammar related questions. Middle school, 9 plus 4, 13. And high school, 11 plus 4, 15. So should you practice grammar skills in isolation with kids who are struggling? Yes, it's very critical. So what are all these weird looking things? Well, let's start in the palm. It says PKL. And when I say PKL, make sure you understand I am not talking about pre-K level, but many of your students are on a pre-K level when it comes to these things here. Penmanship, P, keyboarding, K, and letters. So on paper, penmanship is important. And so I have here Iron Man, and if you look up at me at the screen, Iron Man, when he uses his powers, he spreads out his fingers. So think of Iron Man like print, where no letters are touching. So we should not be doing what I call printsive, where letters are touching. Make sure your kids practice because we want to make sure we have one space between uh, a little space between the letters, one space between each word. If each of these fingers is a word, one space, and then 2 spaces after a period, an exclamation, or a question mark. Okay? Those are all things that are very important to understand. Okay? Unfortunately, if kids don't understand keyboarding correctly, they won't realize there's a difference between lowercase letters. I'll just put the first letter of the alphabet, and uppercase, capitalization. Why is that a problem? Well, because part of editing is your understanding of proper nouns versus common nouns. So it's very important that your kids understand when they push the shift button, what's going to happen is that's going to change the size of the letter that they type, and it will also change the shape. So why is that important? Well, unfortunately, for those of you who have my reading and writing guide for this year, there's a keyboard in the first 5 pages because kids are horrible at keyboarding skills. And most of you know this already. And what you will notice on all keyboards, and you can look at yours right now if you're in front of one, all the letters are in capital. And many times the position of those capital letters is on the top half of each key. And that's interesting because that means that in lowercase, it's going to be possibly on the bottom half. The letter will be lower. In capital, the letter will be higher. But if that's not the case, remind your kids that just because they see something in capital letters, that does not mean that they are going to just have a capital letter come out. You can't push shift lock or caps lock either because you don't want the entire essay in capital letters because a lot of us understand that when people do that, you're like screaming. So, what is the order that I would recommend? Well, first, work on penmanship, keyboarding, and letters. We can call that level 0, or if you need a number that's not 0, level 1. Keep working on that and getting that better so that when they're working on paper, their penmanship, whether it's print or cursive, will increase in quality over time. I had one student who, for some reason, in print, he would always write 100 miles an hour. But when he wrote in cursive, it was almost like he was turning in art, not fart, a masterpiece, not a mess. So he would slow down and write his cursive letters neater. And so when you see Aquaman, when he swims, his fingers are touching. And so the reason I used Aquaman is for cursive letters, letters that touch. And so a lot of times kids struggle with that, and you don't have to do cursive print because that's not the way it's tested in Texas. But I think we need to excel at cursive, so we should practice, and whatever we practice, we end up getting good at. Now, something while we're here is when people ask me, Bill, should I put a cursive and a print alphabet on my wall? Should I only put an alphabet on my wall if I teach elementary? I'm like, no, because when we type on computer, your students are going to see a print version of letters. If you focus mainly on computer, on keyboarding, then put a print alphabet on your board in front of your classroom. Yes, doesn't matter what grade level, because your kids need to see a picture, a visual. What's the difference between a lowercase and an uppercase letter? And do that in all grade levels. It's not going to kill you or your students to have that visible. Or some people have their own student copy. You can buy the little stickers where on each desk you can place a cursive and a print alphabet. If you do teach writing on paper first, if you're not a testing grade, then yes, you want to have probably the print letters in a lower position on in the front of your room, and the cursive ones in a higher position. Then we'll graduate to cups with two S's. All right, level one. I would say that spelling should be ongoing. And if you teach elementary, then have a weekly spelling test. But I highly suggest that whatever vocabulary that you might be teaching that week, add some spelling and vocabulary words based on certain concepts or principles or things that are going to come out in the reading passages. You want them to be able to visualize what do those words look like? What do they sound like? Break apart the syllables. So level one. And if your kids do it right, watch what's going to happen. They're going to see the letter. If you teach them to open their mouth, the scores won't be so low, SOLOW, because I want you to teach them to read so low, SO softly and LO loudly. And when that happens, they're not just going to see the word because they'll be opening their mouth, they'll be saying the word. Because that's happening, they will hear and hopefully be listening to the word. Suddenly, their brain is going to trigger them to think of something. I got my morning coffee here. They will remember some of the other times where you talk to them about certain spelling patterns or rules that certain words follow. And so they'll hopefully use their brain to remember whatever skills that you taught them. If they have a short memory span, they're going to have to rely on a paper book called a dictionary or the online one. And eventually, with practice, if you have it throughout the year, then your kids will begin to write, or type correctly. Now, if you teach secondary, then you're going to have to talk about, let's say you're working with certain patterns. For example, family singular, families plural. Uh, that one, when you're transitioning from singular to plural, there's consonant Y where you drop the Y and add IES. And I'll do a little mini lesson on that for you so that you can make it visual, verbal, auditory, and kinesthetic. Okay. So number two. So anyway, what I want to make sure I finish up on is secondary. Each week, try to cover at least one, perhaps two different spelling patterns. And so every time you're reading something with your students and you come across that pattern, then use those as TMIs. Not too much information because you are being required to give your students too much information in too little time. Use them as teachable moments of instruction where you can say, okay, guys, here's an example of our spelling rule, our spelling pattern for this week. And you can quickly talk about it. If you're noticing that many students, secondary teachers, are struggling, then you might have to do TMI, teachable moments of intervention, where you spend a little bit more time. So spelling, because we're at the letter level. We might not be able to write phrases, sentences, or paragraphs yet. So make sure that all of you in elementary at least are working on spelling slash grade level appropriate vocabulary. So what's bigger than a word? A phrase. So in the first semester, you might talk about all of the different capitalization rules. And so when that's happening, you see the cap there on the thumb, allow kids to wear caps to school that they can wear during the lesson. Now, I had one teacher, I want to tell you, uh, don't put the caps in a box or some kind of container where all the caps are touching each other unless you have big plastic bags to separate them because we are in lice season almost all year round. And so what's going to happen is all the fleas, the lice are going to make their way from one hat to the other. So either have the kids just keep their own hat in their desk and take it home or put them in their backpack, and we can wear caps for capitalization lessons, and it'll make it more fun for the kids and have some rewards for the kids who are creative with that. And then you teach for about 6 weeks, or depending on the ability of the students, it might take 6 weeks to cover all of the capitalization rules. You can't cover it all in 1 week, which what sometimes certain curriculums make you do. So level one, letters, spelling, vocabulary. Level two, phrases. For example, the our my city is capital Edinburgh. Okay. That was visual because you saw me pretend to put a cap on. It was verbal because you heard me say capital. My county, comma, is capital Hidalgo, capital county. If I make it just visual, Hidalgo County. And that's also kinesthetic because you're having to do something. If I make it just auditory, capital Hidalgo, capital county. And that is making sure that you're thinking about these little guys over here. Are you making it V visual, V verbal, A auditory, and you see all these guys have fingers. Are you making it K kinesthetic by doing certain things? And that will help kids who have a short memory span. Then you might say, okay, I'm not ready for a paragraph yet, but I can start working on sentences. Well, in the second 6 weeks, or the second and third, or the third and the fourth, depending on how slow you have to go, you might talk about punctuation. What kind of punctuation marks are we going to have? Well, yellow signs, if you look at that middle finger, you see yellow construction signs and red ones. Think of yellow as slowing the sentence down and red as stopping the sentence. So when you have a situation, you're going to see this with your kids. I see a comma low and a comma high. No, the comma that's low there is separating a city from a state, separating the day from a year, and of course, all the other rules. That comma that's high, that's called the apostrophe contraction. And so the cool thing when you look at your keyboard, and I'm looking at it right now, the bottom level, the bottom rows of keys has the comma where you come on down, and the second level has an up apostrophe. It's the key that's right next to enter. Just to the left, you'll see an apostrophe contraction versus a quotation mark, which has double. Okay. So what else is up here on the top? Commas, apostrophe up in the air. We would probably have opening and closing quotation marks. Okay. Now, I was reflecting on something that I didn't talk about. I talked about my city for capitalization, Edinburgh, my county, Hidalgo County. My state is Texas. So the funny thing is, if you ask your kids, how many of you live in the state of Edinburgh, whatever your city happens to be, half the hands are going to go up. You're going to say, no, comma, you live in the state of confusion, exclamation. Your kids have to differentiate between what a city is, a county, a state, a country, and a continent. Okay. So I live in Texas. So if I do this verbally, I might say capital Texas, or I might say Texas, practicing capital capitalization rules for my state. My country is the Capital United Capital States of Capital America. That's verbal. Let's do it kinesthetically. Capital United Capital States of Capital America. That was visual and verbal, auditory, kinesthetic. Here is just visual. United States of America. Will it help kids? Yes, because you're doing more than a worksheet. You're doing sheets that work. The best sheets that work are getting off the paper and practicing skills in different ways. A lot of your kids are not GT, as I mentioned, they're ED, and it stands for not emotionally disturbed, but explain differently. And so I'm trying to show you if you explain certain skills in different ways for kids who have different abilities and different ways of learning, then what you're doing is differentiated instruction. And basically, you're being a doctor who is prescribing certain prescriptions for your students who learn in many different ways. Our last thing, what continent? So we had city, county, state, country, continent. We live in North America. Since I did not make a visual or verbal connection, your kids might type North and America without any capital letters. North America, that's visual and kinesthetic. Capital North, capital America, that's verbal, and this is both. Capital North, capital America. So let's get back over here to our punctuation. I would probably teach the lower sign first because every sentence is like a street where you're slowing down or stopping the street. We would teach kids to have a period and exclamation. So I'm going to push the shift button, and way up there on the left is an exclamation mark. So when your emotions are high, you're going to say your kids, push the shift button and be excited. Okay. The other one, I'm not sure if it'll fit all three. Let me try. Exclamation, question. Yes, it does. Okay. So if you look at the question mark, again, it's shift, and right next to the period, instead of stating something or giving a command with a period, you're asking something. So teach your students to think of the top part of that question mark like someone's ear, because it does look like an ear on a head. And it kind of like if you connect that to a circle, it almost looks like an earring. And you could be asking questions uh, before and after somebody says something. So the cool thing about that question mark is if the ear is somebody asking something, then ear means I'm waiting for a response. And so if I ask you a question with a question mark, then you would probably need to give me a response that ends in a period. Okay? So if you watch me closely, uh, another way to teach punctuation, which I'll get into in a much deeper lesson, is what I call using my fat guide. And I am fat, and I am admitting it. I'm a little overweight, but it's not because I want to be. It's because I wanted to teach how to do an activity that's called punctuation is pause a ball, where you pause to do something with a ball depending on what kind of punctuation you're seeing. So what's down there on the bottom, those red signs are period, exclamation, question mark. So if I say, sit over there, please, period, I'm going to bounce my imaginary ball. My hand's going to go below the screen to the floor, and I'll catch it. And do you trust many kids with a ball? No. You might trust one kid in the whole class with the punctuation ball, but the rest of them have to do it with an imaginary ball. The cool thing is it won't be bouncing all over the room. There's a fire in that building! Exclamation. Floor. What is your name? Question mark. Floor. That's the F of fat. Up in the A, air, is the apostrophe, the contraction, the opening and closing quotation marks. They're all up there in the air. You can see them higher on the yellow construction sign. The bottom one has a comma, but because I have a middle school audience, you might have to teach how to use shift a colon and unshift a semicolon. And very quickly, a colon is in the middle of your body. So you're going to tell them, my shirt is like my independent clause. Then my colon is in the middle of my body. And in grammar, that means I'm going to give you a short list that supports whatever I told you about in my first sentence. A semicolon means I have two independent clauses. My shirt is the first one, my pants are the second one, but a semicolon says unless the first word is a proper noun, then you write that in lowercase. Now, that's something that many of you in lower elementary might not have to worry about, but they're going to probably see some semicolon. So you might at least talk to them about what that is when they see it, because they'll be like, why does this have a period and a comma? Why is there a period above that comma? You're going to get weird stuff like that. Okay. So I'll be teaching all of these skills separately so that we can have lots of great ideas. Then, because I still might not be ready for whole paragraphs of usage, I might come over here to the S called sentence boundaries. Okay. In the reading guides that I have, and I'm going to read it to you. This is my paper version of it. I'm going to read you rule number 1 in editing. It says, what error inline, drop down, or change in sentence blank? So if that question is asked of your students, that's a regular CUPSS question. That means the mistake will be one of capitalization, usage, punctuation, or spelling. But that pinky is rule 2 and 3. It says, what is the correct or best way to write sentence blank? Because it says correct or best and not change, and it says sentence singular, what that means, and I'm going to come here below the little boy, he's running and he's sweating. That means there might be a run on. Sometimes when that question is asked, it's a fragment. That means reader's whiplash. I'm enjoying your sentence, but right in the middle of a thought, before you finished your subject and your predicate in what you were writing, you put a period, an exclamation, or a question mark. That red wall is suddenly stopping, running into the wall. Reader's whiplash. If by chance it asks this instead, What is the correct or best way to write sentences, plural, blank, and blank? What do they mean by that? That means that, and this is rule number 3 on my list, that the first uh, sentence they see will be a complete sentence, a complete thought. And it will be followed by a fragment, uh, something that's a sentence that's missing the subject or the predicate. And there's not a word, but you can say sap. That's a sentence followed by a fragment, and they've got to fix that. Okay. And I will be honest, the pinky here, these sentence boundary issues, every grade level usually gets at least one, sometimes two. And because it's the one that is practiced the least, it's the one that, to be honest, most posters don't even have this S. And I'm not sure why, because uh, sentences don't just need cups correctly written, they need sentence boundaries, knowing when to stop a sentence and start the next one. But sometimes it might be the other way around. If your students look at it carefully, they'll see a fragment first and they will see the complete sentence afterwards. And most of the time, these are in multiple choice. I haven't seen one of these it's so difficult on its own. I haven't seen one of these in the drop down, what's called the inline drop down choice. If you have my reading and writing guide, inline drop down choice, that's number 3. It's box number 3, where it's not regular multiple choice, but they have to click on something. And I have all of my separate capitalization, usage, punctuation, spelling, runs. I have that both in regular multiple choice and I have them in text entry and also inline drop down choices for you because our kids need to practice stuff like that. And I sent that to all of you who have signed up for the uh, recorded writing and reading training. So let me know if you can't find that. All right. So our last one, when kids are finally ready for the paragraph level, then that's called usage. Usage is basically subject, Spider-Man's head, predicate, Spider-Man's body, subject, action, subject, verb. Okay. If you look at his fingers, you can see here that he's got one finger here and multiple fingers. He's saying, I love you over here. But really what he's saying is that is the subject, the person, place, thing, or idea singular, or is it plural? His feet have shoes that are red. Does it have a punctuation at the end? If it asks you a question, there's 2 ways to look at these arrows. Okay. If it says, what change should be made in sentence 13? Well, a lot of times and so you highlight in yellow there, sentence 13. What they might have to do is push rewind and say, in order to understand certain things that are told to me there, I need to rewind to sentence 12 and see, is that written, is the subject singular or is it plural so I can choose the correct answer? Is it in past, that red arrow here, present, the yellow one, or future? And so sometimes if they can't read the whole paragraph, at least make them read the previous sentence and the following one. And so if you have the monkeys, then you might have a yellow monkey being the sentence that you're talking about, a red monkey meaning the sentence right before the one being asked about, and a green monkey the one after. And so that, my friends, is the order that I would recommend that you teach them. Penmanship, keyboarding letters all year long, spelling, every single week. If you're in elementary, have a spelling test, and hopefully the spelling test will grow in terms of how many words. You don't need a million, but hopefully you're going to build on the quantity of words so you can build the quality of your kid's ability to spell appropriately. Make sure that there's more than one of each spelling rule that because sometimes they need three, four, five words with the same spelling pattern. And you don't necessarily need a spelling book because a lot of places can't even, a lot of districts can't even find typical spelling books anymore. They've kind of thrown it by the wayside. And what's happening? Spelling is horrible now because we thought, oh, we don't need to do what was typically working in the past. So we need to teach sometimes spelling in isolation. So spelling all year long, uh, if you're secondary, introduce spelling as you're covering reading skills. First and or second 6 weeks, capitalization. Second and or third 6 weeks, punctuation. While or after you teach the understanding of a sentence, you will spend a couple of weeks or a month if you feel like it's a skill that is not going well on sentence boundaries. And in the Dear Doc Finder, I do have one passage of each of these where you can see it in passage format where each of these is tested separately, where you're only working on capitalization, only usage, only punctuation, only spelling, only sentence boundaries. Okay. Because I feel like sometimes we need lots of practice with the same skill. And then finally, whenever your kids are ready for the paragraph level, because usage means for sure I need to know, two or more sentences so I can check how the sentence is being used in terms of subject verb agreement. How is this sentence structured? Is it simple or is it compound? Is it complex? And it depends. So what word you use depends on how it's being used. It's usage. So there you have it. I hope that that was helpful to you. For all of you who have signed up for the reading writing training, I will be sending. I've given you the version, the PDF where you can print this, and now today I'll be sending you the text entry where you can do like I just did, and the kids don't have to print anything out. You can talk about different skills and go over them with your kids, and they can practice making their hand and putting CUPSS and then PKL in the middle, just to remember all of the skills that have to happen related to conventions, grammar, and editing. God bless. Thank you guys so much and have a wonderful day. Or as Mr. Rogers used to say, a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Or as Gangsta would say, a beautiful day in the hood. Take care and good day.